This is Bolivia, Political Crossroads, where we give a rundown and analysis of the developments in Bolivia's political landscape, starting with the controversial general elections held October 20th of 2019, which sparked a 3-week-long nationwide protest that eventually led to the resignation of ex-President Evo Morales. We'll continue following the developments through the new elections projected to be held in April 2020. Your hosts for this podcast are Ernesto Machicao and Paul Rackner. Ernesto, a La Paz native residing in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, is an experienced lawyer and political analyst who in the past has also participated actively in Bolivian politics. Paul, that be me, is an American-born Bolivian with a background in Latin American studies and also resides in Santa Cruz. We hope you enjoy listening, and we encourage you to share with others who you think may be interested, and also appreciate your comments, suggestions, and any feedback you may have. On today's program, we'll be discussing two topics: the falling out between Luis Fernando Camacho and Marco Antonio Pumari, two of the key protagonists in the opposition protests against Evo Morales, who later became for a short time political allies and potential running mates for the upcoming elections. Later on, we'll get into the MAS Party's proposal for a new law that aims at granting immunity to Evo Morales and others within the party based on the events that unfolded from October 21st onward. And now we bring you Episode 3. Welcome to Episode 3 of Bolivia Political Crossroads. Your hosts are Ernesto Machicao and Paul Rackner, and today we're going to talk about the falling out between Luis Fernando Camacho and Marco Pumari, the former already having declared his presidential candidacy, and the latter still not saying anything officially. What I've seen so far with this is that I'm honestly disappointed. I think most people are. What's going on here is that it seems that Camacho has really rushed things and put pressure on Pumari to accept the position as vice president. Apparently, according to both sides, there were private discussions with recordings that made them not so private later. And supposedly, according to Camacho's version, Pumari had already confirmed and committed to accepting the vice president position on the bill. What's been going on is that I'd say about a week, 10 days ago, an audio was leaked to a media outlet, it's called Detrás de la Verdad, I think is what it is. I don't know if it's just a Facebook page or if they have anything in print. But this audio was released of a conversation between Camacho and Pumari, in which supposedly Pumari was asking for $250,000 as a payment for accepting the vice presidency, and also asking for control of customs in Potosi and Oruro. I think it was I think those two departments. Both. And yeah, both. According to Camacho, that this was unacceptable, and this was the reason he didn't want to run with Pumari. And Pumari refuted the accusations and what was released on this recording, because first of all, he said it was doctored. According to Camacho, it was released by somebody that accompanied Pumari in the meeting. And according to Pumari, he went to the meeting with one person, and Camacho was there with like 6 or 7 other people. And he questioned, he said, I have absolute trust and confidence in the person that went to the meeting with me, and I can't believe that they would have recorded without me knowing and then filtered something or leaked the audio. He said it wasn't the complete audio. He said it sounded like, or it had been edited, that the $250,000 payment was not a payment to Pumari, but he was asking or expressing that $250,000 would be needed for the campaign itself. Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
And regarding customs, it's not clear to me what statements he made to refute that, but he says that it wasn't true. And so that was the first audio that was leaked of a conversation that took place between these two guys. and it obviously damaged both of their images. The people who took it, who believe that it's authentic, obviously it looks bad for Pumari if he was asking for that money to run as Camacho's vice president and asking for control of two government institutions. For those that don't know or can't imagine why somebody would want control of customs, customs has always had problems with corruption and bribery for importing of all kinds of goods. And Potosí and Oruro are two key areas where, because the border that share with Chile, a lot of vehicles come in through there and all kinds of stuff. Camacho says that he didn't know that it was being recorded either, that it couldn't have been one of his guys that recorded it. And just a couple of nights ago, he was interviewed on CNN with Fernando Rincon. And Fernando Rincon made public that Camacho had sent him personally another recording of a conversation between Camacho and Pumari prior to this first recording being leaked within Bolivia. And basically, if you look at the interview with Del Rincon, it really does not make Camacho look good. It calls into question his integrity, and the fact that he says he didn't know that he was being recorded the second time when he personally sent the first recording that he sent to Del Rincon. He says that he didn't record either of them, and the first one that he sent to Del Rincon was recorded by the hotel where they were having the meeting in one of the meeting rooms that the hotel provides for businesses, and which the hotel has already publicly denied. And basically, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it not good for I think it's more damaging to Camacho than to Pumari. That's for sure. That's my take on it. It looks like he's been sneaky, dishonest, and really done some things that really call into question his ethics. So that's where I'll leave it.
Okay. No, definitely. I think that, well, the facts have been spelled out by you very clearly, and I think there's very little to add in terms of what happened there. I think there's a lot of room for interpretation here. However, there's anybody
Sure.
really can. There are many interpretations that can be given to all these facts. There's no question about that. I'll start by your last statement. Definitely, taping people, recording people secretly. Not only in Bolivia. In Bolivia, it is a crime. It's stated in the criminal code as a crime, and it even has time in prison for people that secretly tape you and then make public that taping.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely is a crime. I don't know if it's everywhere in the world, but I would suppose
it's a crime. It's a crime in the States, I believe. I believe at least one of the two parties has to have knowledge that the recording is being made. Don't quote me on that. I'm not.
Yeah.
In Bolivia, it has to be both parties.
Sure. Because only one party wouldn't have too much sense in this. I mean, if I would know and you would know that I'm recording you, that's illegal, absolutely, because I'm getting your information, right? Well, however, whichever way in Bolivia, it's illegal to do that. You would have to have permission by a judge in order to make a recording legal. You have to be in a proceeding, in a criminal proceeding, but this is not the case. This is just somebody went and taped and then made it publicly. So definitely that is a crime. But this is something that I feel that it's not known by people, because everybody just speaks about the fact that he recorded or somebody recorded this conversation. In general, not only in this case, but in general, I find that people don't find that it's a crime to do that. It's not something funny and not something that can just be taken lightly. It cannot be taken lightly. It is a crime. It has prison terms.
So Pumari could actually press charges against Camacho if he wanted to do so, or against I guess he'd have to find out who recorded the conversation, and then
who recorded. Yeah, but
sorry, go ahead.
Pumari could go to the authorities, in this case to the attorney, and present himself with he can file suit and say somebody has to. Well, the investigators should do the research and see who person the guilty party is, but a crime was committed. It's just like any crime. Somebody finds a dead corpse in the street and with a bullet in the head. Well, they don't know who put the bullet in the head, but a crime has been committed there, and an investigation starts with a denunciation. So there has to be a denunciation here if he wanted to do it, but he's not moving. He's not doing anything. I presume that he knows that, but because some lawyer must be around him that can tell him this. He hasn't done any of that. But away from the strictly legal point of view, just going into the political thing, which is the discussion on this issue, I find the following here. I was very careful about listening the interview with Mr. Del Rincon from CNN. That was a very enlightening conversation because it brought out a point which Del Rincon mentioned it as he obviously Del Rincon finds the depth on this, but the issue is that Mr. Camacho wanted to avoid the question. He successfully did it, and Del Rincon did not push into the matter. My interpretation about this fact, in accordance to what Fernando Del Rincon said on CNN, is the following: Camacho is not middle-aged nun in some monastery in Europe. I mean, yeah, he didn't do this because it was so awful to hear Pumari mention the $250,000 and the aduanas in Oruro and Potosi. I don't think that really. I don't think he's that much of a moralist, and I don't think any politician in the face of the world is that moral. Because first of all, if we analyze, I just didn't want to analyze too much before you see the main thing. $250,000 to run a campaign would probably finance a campaign in the Rotary Club in Santa Cruz, but a national campaign where the presidency and the vice presidency is at stake, it's a millenary process,
it's a very small number.
Yeah,
talking about a presidential campaign.
It's really, like they say in the U.S., peanuts. This is peanuts. I mean,
yep.
And of course, Mr. Pumari doesn't have the money. He doesn't have $250. He doesn't have $25,000 together at this point. So, in order to run his own campaign, he needs some money, and that's what he explained. He doesn't go into the depth, and that's something that really bothers me about Pumari. He's not a seasoned politician yet to go into depth where he needs to go to the in depth. But $250,000 to run a campaign is nothing, and if he was demanding that amount of money to run his campaign, I think that is a fair thing. It is not only necessary; it's absolutely necessary. Unless he has money, how can he undertake a campaign? And it's not like in the States, where people come and they put money. In Bolivia, there is no such custom, especially in the last 14 years. This was like Cuba. Who would put money in order to go against Fidel Castro? Nobody. Well, this is Bolivia nowadays. All the business people that had money in Bolivia backed Fidel Castro, backed Morales here because the dictator needed money and they gave him money, but nobody else. Because if the dictator finds out that a big enterprise guy is giving money to an opposition guy, the enterprise guy would be killed or harmed very badly in his business,
persecuted in some way.
Yeah, persecuted in some way. So that's out of the question. The custom of putting money into the campaign in Bolivia has eroded, if there ever was one. I think there was. It was customary to finance campaigns before 2005. Not as much as in the States, but it was pretty customary because business people have interests, and they have interests in order to sell things to the government. Just like in the U.S., they put money because then the state buys things from this big entrepreneur, this big business people. So same thing happened in Bolivia in the past, but not anymore. And we are just getting out of the dictatorship, so it's very hard to establish things as they were before 2005. That doesn't happen. So Pumari had a point in order to ask for money with the goal of financing a campaign. He didn't have, however, he doesn't have an argument to ask for for the aduanas, for the customs office in Oruro and Potosi. His argument was, and I don't know if to believe him or not, although he's a young politician, but still the argument is feeble here. His argument was that Oruro and Potosi need people from Oruro and Potosi to administer those offices, the customs offices and other institutions, because the people that have been appointed that are not from Oruro and Potosi, and they do not necessarily defend the interests of Oruro and Potosi in different institutions, among which is the customs office. That was his point there. I don't know if that's just
it's a pretty good argument. It's a national institution, and doesn't, beyond giving employment to local residents.
Right. It's not a strong argument. That was what he said. But see, away from the fact that you can argue either way on all these points, it still doesn't sound right what Camacho did, not from a moral point of view, but from a political point of view. Camacho without Pumari is reduced to the minimum arithmetic expression. It's just Camacho, not even to the second exponent. It's just Camacho becomes Camacho, and he has only the votes in Santa Cruz, if anything. But if he doesn't have Pumari, he is very circumscribed only to Santa Cruz. So why did he do it? What happened to him? It doesn't square up. It doesn't sound right what he did. My theory, but again, this theory is accompanied by what Fernando Rincon asked to Camacho in the interview, is the following. If one looked at the social networks, Facebook especially in Bolivia, Facebook is very big, Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, sure.
You can find out that during those previous days to the making public of this recordings, you could see that Pumari was the favorite among both of them in order to be the presidential candidate of this couple. That seemed very clear.
You think it's a matter of ego, and not wanting.
Yeah, but
not wanting to put Camacho wanting the presidential seat and not the vice presidential.
But I think it goes farther. This is a psychological thing. Some psychology and some psychiatrist has to study this more deeply. What happened is that he could tell that what was happening. It was too obvious. Everybody, most of the people were backing up Pumari and not backing up Camacho as the presidential candidate in this binomio. So
yeah, I'd agree with that.
He could see that, that's not a mystery, So what he did, I think, immediately, as soon as he found this out, is that he spoke with Pumari in order to convince Pumari to become his vice presidential candidate in order to
think. I remember Pumari saying he wanted him to sign a document,
right.
like a legal document binding him to that commitment.
Yeah, he was too worried about this. He was extremely worried about this because he realized that this guy was a ghost, a big ghost, an uncontrollable ghost. So there was a Pumari growing up every day more and more, and a Camacho that didn't have the votes but wanted to be the president. So he convinced, I think, I don't know how but he convinced Pumari in order to be the vice presidential candidate, and he taped him. With the first tape, he sent the tape to Fernando Rincon. Yes. So that Fernando Rincon would know this. Fernando Rincon would finally say, "Oh, yes, they reached an agreement. Pumari wants to be the vice presidential candidate, and there's no question about this." That was the intention of Camacho at that moment. But I think that this thing just got absolutely under his. It was uncontrollable for Camacho because the thing started to grow, and he was too worried about this, And I think he reached the point where he say, "There's a saying in Spanish that says morir matando. You die killing somebody. Just you." It's like with women, she's with me or with nobody in the world, and then the guy goes and kills the girl, because he cannot be with another guy. This is very much that situation, he didn't even want, well, this is worse than that situation. there was a point in which Camacho didn't even want Pumari, to be his vice president, because he probably felt that anywhere he went to, people would start screaming the name of Pumari and not the name of Camacho.
Take away his spotlight.
Yes, and this happened previously, if you remember, in the days of the upheaval. Whenever Pumari would go out, people really, really dug him, and they applauded and they cheered his name, and they also cheered Camacho's name, because it was like the fair thing to do. But to me, it just sounded very clear, like in La Paz and Cochabamba, people were more loud when they shouted Pumari's name. The indigenous factor is still present in Bolivia. That, no question about that.
If you ask me personally, there's more to like about the guy. I mean, about Pumari. He comes from humble origins, and he's the classic example of somebody who worked his way to the top, so to speak. Yeah. Whereas Camacho's, I mean, I don't know that much about his family background, but I know he's in business, father, and so I'm not going to come out and say, oh, he comes from a rich family, because I honestly don't. My impression is that he didn't have to struggle the same way Pumari did to get to where he is today.
Yeah, there's no,
and so that politically that holds a lot of weight.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. Camacho is a rich kid, and because his father made a fortune in the last 20 years or 25 years, he made a big fortune. And Camacho is just the brat, he wants to be president, he has the money, and he's going to get dad's money in order to achieve his purpose. That's all it amounts to. And people perceive that. Even though people don't know the facts, they can perceive that. So the fact that Pumari comes from very humble origins, the fact that he's an indigenous guy, and that he's educated, because he has a good education. Although he's very poor, he went to college, he got a degree in business, and there he is. He's a very good. He's much better than Evo Morales, as an intellectual guy, definitely. So he had a ghost beside him, Camacho. And he just reached to the point. He said, I'm going to kill the ghost, because I can't live with the ghost, not even as a vice presidential candidate. And he decided that this was the only way to kill the ghost. He had a tape where Pumari was saying that, he needed $250,000, and that he needed to get the customs office in Potosi and Oruro. Made it public, and the effect was this. Definitely, and I agree with you, the effect is much worse on Pumari than it is on Camacho. Camacho, he.
You think the effects have been worse, have damaged Pumari more than Camacho?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because
okay, I was saying the opposite. I guess I didn't make myself clear that. But I guess it's the way. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that Camacho. I think that Pumari didn't have a good answer. He had a good answer, but he didn't make the point very clear with respect to the money. And people in Bolivia and anywhere in the world, when they hear $250,000, that sounds corruption, And in Bolivia, when they hear that they want the customs office, that's corruption. So it's very hard for any person in Bolivia to explain and to have this explanation being accepted. It just isn't, And I think the calculation was good in that, Camacho was right in his calculation. He killed the guy, he absolutely killed him politically, I don't know if this death is going to be forever, but for the time being, it's death. Not for Camacho, Camacho.
You don't think so? I think Camacho. Sorry, I after seeing especially the interview with Del Rincon, first, after the first audio was leaked or the first recording was leaked, if you go on Facebook and even in the newspapers, there was some pretty fierce criticism of what had happened. I don't think anybody believed him when he said, "Oh, it was Pumari's guy that leaked this audio or this recording." And Fernando Rincon, for those that aren't in Bolivia, is as much of a national hero right now as Camacho and Pumari were for their role in the upheaval that caused Morales to resign.
Right.
And so Del Rincon really laid into him and put him in a difficult position, and basically made him look bad. I think that's also going to be really hard for him to recover because it shows that he's
not worth,
you know
not trustworthy.
his true nature. He's sneaky and it's all about his own self-interest.
My theory is that in the political world is badly seen, but not it doesn't kill somebody. It kills somebody when you speak about money itself. You know, being corrupt is money. You know, $250,000 is to me it doesn't have a part in politics. Although as I explained before, and this is something absolutely understandable to me, especially the $250,000, not the customs office in Oruro and Potosi, but the $250,000, absolutely explainable in politics. But people tend not to accept that as an argument. You know, nothing is an argument for money, even if you speak about 200 bucks. You know, that sounds very bad to the corruption. In the corruption
In Bolivia, I know of cases of people bribing a police officer with the equivalent of $1.50. So, at any scale, it doesn't look good or sound good. So
right, it doesn't sound good. But you know what Camacho did? Did you ever hear Trump speak about his taxes? You know, and everybody asks him to show his forms, and he says he never showed them. You know, he's not going to show them anymore, and he laughs at them. You know, and then people ask him, Democrats ask him whether he paid or didn't pay. He say, well, he's just a brilliant guy. He doesn't pay too much. You know, because he's good lawyers and because he's very bright and he knows the laws. You know, that never meant too much against him. You know. People in general tend to think that if a politician is swift and they pardon him because that's politics, and I think Camacho in the end of this whole process will end up like he's a learning guy. He's learning politics. These were his first steps in politics. Of course, it wasn't a good thing he did that, but I think he's going to just continue his life. Maybe not as good as if he would have gone with Pumari in a ticket. I'm certain of that. I think that Pumari and Camacho in a ticket would have been invincible in Bolivia. Camacho by himself is far from being invincible. He's not going to make it. I think he's going to be a very mediocre candidate, even if he gets a contract with one of the best marketing enterprises in the world. I know that he went to the States for that.
Oh, that was his. Again, those listening, Camacho, excuse me, took a trip to the States where he spoke publicly at an event and had meetings with some. Yeah, just like Avon, Mexico. Yeah. So that's interesting. I didn't know that, and I guess it shouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah. But these people can really turn things around. This enterprise are good. This marketing people are just brilliant. If you get the right company, the marketing company, they can do brilliant things. Because they know how to do it. Just to give you an example, and I think he went to the same enterprise. And I forgot the name of the guy, but Goni's marketing enterprise was a company in 2002. Mm-hmm. Which made a movie.
Yeah, I've seen the movie with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, where he beat out Reyes Villa, right?
Right. He went to that company.
To the same one.
Went to search for that company. Yeah, to the same. Yeah, he didn't have the lights to look for a different company. He went to a company that was successful in Bolivia in order to have a successful campaign, even if you're a bad candidate. Because that's how they sold themselves to Goni in 2002. They went and said, hey, you're very bad, because Goni was doing very bad in the polls. And he said, we're experts. We can make you president, although you're very low in the polls, And although Reyes Villa was like 40% in the polls and Goni was like 18%, and they made a strategy in order to have to have Reyes Villa fall to 18% at the end of the campaign. And they had a justifiable argument. They said, we did this in Israel. And I think they had done something like that in Israel, They are experts at making bad candidates get the job. So he went to that same company. Yeah. I think it's Greenberg. I don't remember the name, but Yeah, he went to the very same company, and I don't know if he signed a contract, but he's looking for somebody to save his life.
Mm-hmm.
And these companies tend to have they're international companies, and they have good experience all over the world, and they can do. I don't know if they can do miracles as such, but they can twist things around, especially in a campaign like the one that's coming forth. No, if you look at the future, Paul, you'll see that there's no strong candidate right now. Evo Morales is not in the field, in the battlefield. So when Evo is not in the field, there's no big leader really on the field.
Mm-hmm.
People perceive that Mesa can be a good candidate. Yes, I don't think he's a great candidate. I don't think he's going to have the polls very, very, very high. So most of these candidates are medium-sized candidates. And I think in that perspective, even if Camacho is hurt, with a good marketing, he can redo himself in the midterm. I think not to become a big candidate and have a landslide victory, but I think he can do a pretty good job.
You
and
think
end up
there's a
being one
genuine
of the two.
possibility that he can pull it off if he's got the right.
I think if he gets to the right marketing company, I think because I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen. With money. You can do wonders in marketing. And he doesn't have too much of a political history. He's only that point to this point. So let's see what happens. I think he's reduced from what he was before. There's no question about that. From 1 to 10, before with Pumari, he would have been 9, I think, or 8. Now he's 2 or 3, but the other ones are not 10 either. Carlos Mesa from 1 to 10, I think, is
Yeah, I would have said
5.
4 or 5.
And yeah, the Maz is 4 or 5. So if Camacho is 2 or 3, he's there. He can reach that.
Now, do you think Pumari is gonna come out and announce like his candidacy, or do you think or what do you think?
I think his reasoning is a little bit different than most politicians. Most politicians would still be in the debate, defending themselves, explaining and moving around in the political arena. I find that Pumari has just withdrawn, and that's bad. But he has just withdrawn. He's silent, and I don't know what he's going to do in the future. But it doesn't seem like too much, because he found himself too affected by this. And
what you say about the $250,000 and looking bad? Remember in the campaigns before the election on October 20th, one thing that came to light was the supposed payout to Mesa, where he ran with Goni, and it was much more. It was I think it was $850,000, something like that. 750 or
no, he asked for $1,200,000.
Wow.
And I don't know if he was paid $1,200,000, but I think he definitely was paid $800,000. Yeah, there's no question about that.
But it's not technically illegal. It might be immoral. At least that's the way I understood it.
Oh no, no, it's not illegal.
And so, but in the end, it didn't seem to have any real effect on Mesa. I don't think he lost a significant number of votes because of that issue.
Right. No, I don't think so either. Because there was another factor here, and it's the enemy was too big, Evo Morales was the object, and we wanted to destroy Evo Morales at whatever cost. So if somebody wanted to harm Carlos Mesa, we were deaf, we didn't want to hear anything, any argument against Carlos Mesa, because most of the people in Bolivia just wanted to oust the dictator. I think that was the argument then at that point. I think in a different campaign, it would have hurt Carlos Mesa more.
Okay, so basically because the stakes aren't as high at this point. Although I'd argue they are, because if the MAS if the MAS pulls off a win in this election, then I don't even want to think about that. But at this time, like you just said, there are no strong candidates. So that wasn't the case when Mesa was up against Evo.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah, but like you say, in the end, he didn't lose that much. The allegation was made, the accusations were there. The people that gave him the money went out in TV, and they said, that they gave him the money, and that was it. There was very little doubt about what happened. And Carlos Mesa never answered any of those allegations. He said that
He
was
dodged.
a dirty war, and he dodged it. He said he's not going to end in the dirty war. He's not going to answer any of those allegations. He never addressed them at all. He never said yes or no. I don't know what Pumari is thinking. Don't forget. Carlos Mesa is a marketing enterprise by himself. He has so much experience in these things, but that's not the case with Pumari. I think Pumari is just reacting as a very young politician still. Carlos Mesa, definitely. He's a man of the media, and he knows how to control those things much better than most politicians, I think. And he chose silence, and silence worked for him. But I don't know if this is going to work for Pumari as well as it did especially because of the circumstance. He's too young. In the case of Carlos Mesa, I don't know. People think that first it was not illegal, like you say, it was immoral. To me, the point about Pumari is not the $250,000. It's why he
for
asked
the control of customs
for a customs. Yeah, but what few people also questioned is, why do you ask somebody to give you a customs office?
Yeah.
Why ask?
To me, the answer, I think I stated at the beginning. To me, if you've been in Bolivia you don't even have to live there for that long to know that there's a lot of money to be made working in customs. I mean, money under the table.
No. I don't mean that. I mean, if rationally, I would go to Mrs. Giannini right now, Giannini Agnes, and say, hey, I want the customs office in the border of Santa Cruz with Brazil. That's a rational thing to do. I mean, it's immoral, but it's rational because she can actually give me the office of the customs office, right? But why would I go to Mr. Camacho and ask him for the customs office in Santa Cruz? Only if I knew. It sounds irrational because he's not the president of Bolivia. He's not the minister of finance. He's not even the head of the customs office in Bolivia. He's nothing. He has no official post in the government. But if I go to him and ask him for the customs office in Puerto Suarez, he has two choices. He says, you're crazy because I'm not nobody to answer you, to give you this. Or he says, yes, I can give to you. We go half-half. He has the power. That's why he was asked for that. He was asked for the customs office because he controls power in Bolivia at this moment. And that's something that the press in general and the political world has not coped.
I was under the assumption, or my take on it was that these were conditions, for, okay, you'll get the 2,050 or 250,000 that obviously come prior to the campaign. The control of the customs, I was interpreting that as something that, okay, once we're in, I get this, right?
Oh, no. Once we're in, we get the government half-half. No, not only Oruro and Potosí. It's now. He wanted to control the customs office now.
Wow.
That was the petition there. Yes. And that's my point. Why do you put this petition to Mr. Camacho? Because he can do it. Remember in that tape, I think he realized he was being taped in the middle of this issue. When this issue was discussed, I think Pumari realized that he was being taped. And he said, I am not asking you a ministry. I'm not asking you anything. And Camacho answered immediately. And he said, of course you're not asking a ministry because I have no ministries or something like that. But Camacho had in mind that he did have three ministries, that he had Justiniano as the minister of the presidency, who had to leave the ministry because he was fired from the ministry because of corruption, But Camacho is seen as somebody that has power and that has influence over the president, the actual president of Bolivia, Mrs. Agnes. Yeah, that's the petition was in the sense of give it to me now. And the petition goes in order to finance the campaign, of course, yes. The combo was perfect for financing a campaign. Give me $250,000, which may be not enough, but also give me the customs office, because with that I can complement that $250,000 and run a good campaign. That's the translation. And now that's a very Bolivian translation. I understand that this is how things work around here, It's an immediate petition. It's not a petition in the midterm. Yeah, he wanted money to run the campaign. Yeah, definitely. But then he backed off and he said no, that this was not for the campaign. This was for Oruro and Potosí because these departments have to control their institutions and the income that they perceive for the development. Blah blah blah. Yeah.
All right.
But again, from looking at this minuscule things which are very important, I think the whole issue was jealousy. It was envy. He couldn't see this guy as a leader, and he wanted to destroy the leader. He made a good shot, and I think that he destroyed him to great measure. The question is still dwindling there. What you mentioned, is he going to come back or not? Pumari, I mean, we still don't know that. I hope he comes back.
He's been awfully quiet. I guess we'll find out. Moving on, we've got about a third of the program left here to talk about this immunity law that's pending. You're definitely, again, when it comes to the everything legal, you've definitely got more knowledge and probably a better perspective on this than I do. What you sent me this morning, and you said this the other day when we decided to choose this topic, was that the laws before they're passed aren't usually made public. And so it'd be hard to analyze a law that nobody's been able to read, at least the draft, before it's been approved, right? And so what you sent me this morning, at least what it looks like to me, the second half of it is the proposal for the law itself. And what I understand from that, at least the main points, and the first point that it makes is basically that the proposal is to, if I understood it right, is to prohibit in any way judicial processes, apprehensions, or what you could say, of any type of, basically anybody. But it starts out with leaders of social movements, union or syndicate leaders, which we all know that Evo Morales is still the leader of the Cocaleros in Chapare. And then it goes down the list of indigenous movements, and at the very end it says, in any private citizen, really. And so that's the first point, is basically to clear the way for Evo Morales and I guess the MAS party in general, or anybody, the higher ups, or anybody, to eliminate any risk of any judicial process or charges being pressed against them, much less for them to be apprehended or detained. And then I think further down it also it also talks about that, I guess, something that was already constitutionally a law, is that the people in the General Assembly, the deputies and the senators, already have immunity while they're in office, if I understood that correctly. So that's the gist of it. I mean, at least that's what I took away from it. It definitely seems to worry me. What I'd ask you, first of all, what charges could be pressed against Evo Morales and his ministers, Quintana, Carlos Romero, Alvaro Garcia Linera, and other people that took part in the riots and the unrest that came following Evo's resignation?
Mm-hmm. What charges can you press?
Sure, because I mean, technically, that's the thing. It also, the other thing that seems, going back to a summary of this law, is basically it seems like they're really worried about, all of a sudden, when due process has never been a big concern for the MAS party. All of a sudden, there's this huge focus and concern that due process is followed to a T, right? And so the question there is that, because this interim government has already been talking about. Jeanine Áñez, I think yesterday, actually stated that we should see within the next couple of days charges pressed against Morales formally for sedition and terrorism, right? But legally, are there the grounds to press charges against him?
Yeah, you can press charges on Evo Morales on many fronts, definitely. With regard to the last event in Bolivia from 20th of October until now, there is a guy that presented a denunciation in The Hague recently. Did you see him?
His name escapes me, but I read about that.
Yeah. he has a good interview with Amalia Pando, which I think was put on the net yesterday or the day before. And it is a very good interview, a very good, very technical, but very good one. Basically, what he's saying is that the reason they went to The Hague is because in The Hague, there exists an international criminal court. By the way, an international criminal court is a new thing in the world. New 20 years ago. Yeah, relatively new. That's new in the world. There was no such thing before. In 10 million years, there was never an international court, and criminal court. So 20 years is nothing versus 10 million years. We have a court finally, where people can go and press charges against individuals, and it's an international court, which is tremendous power because countries, what they do when they become part of this court is they surrender their laws and their proceedings in their courts. They say, okay, we agree in order to surrender our dominion over the
they agree to become subject to any rulings
to a higher court. Yeah, to our higher court, right? Which is an international court. By the way, just as a matter of information to you and to our listeners, the U.S. began as part of this court. When the court was being negotiated and the statutes were being written, the U.S. was part of the team. These statutes were written in Rome. They were called the Rome statutes, and they started writing all these laws in Rome. But when they were about to end, the U.S. withdrew, and they said, "No way. There's no way." As a general rule, the U.S. Does not surrender their competency to international courts in criminal matters and in human rights matters. For example, the U.S. did not surrender vis-a-vis the Corte Internacional de Derechos Humanos of the Americas, the International Court of Human Rights in the Americas. They're not part of that, The U.S. supports everything that is human rights, but they do not
But they don't surrender any type of judicial sovereignty to.
No, absolutely, It has an explanation. Well, the basic explanation is we don't want to surrender that because we're a sovereign nation and we are going to rule all criminals in the U.S. and we're not going to let any foreigner get us in jail, basically, Because if they would do that, just think, Obama could be tried in the international court because he shot this guy in, remember the guy in Afghanistan, right? They're so close to Osama bin Laden, So somebody could start a lawsuit, saying that this guy was shot, and he was shot illegally, A whole different issue ballgame is that in the States that is okay because he damaged the U.S. so badly, But in legal terms, you cannot shoot anybody, You can't go after a criminal and just shoot him in the streets or in a house.
Yeah, because he was never tried. Right.
No, he was never tried. No, we just agreed that he was a bad guy and shoot him, just like in the movies, So again, he could, Obama could be tried there, of course, and like that in many other cases in U.S. history. That's why the U.S. does not allow to surrender its sovereignty to international courts. But aside from that point, which is an interesting point, Bolivia did surrender its sovereignty vis-a-vis the Hague, and this International Criminal Court is valid to us. So, how this works is that if that you can go to an international court when the national courts don't work. What happened with this issue here? There is a senator in Bolivia, a woman senator, Eva Gonzalez is her name. She went and made the denunciation of this facts. She went and said, Evo Morales committed this crime in this last couple of weeks. He from Mexico. He talked to people of his party in El Chapare and told them to block all the cities and have the people die
cut off food supply.
of lack. Yeah, cut off food supply. So yeah, that is a crime. Of course, you can't do that. And these guys applied the recipe. They went and they did that. Well, they couldn't obtain the results, the final results, but the crime was being committed. So there were grounds to do that. So Eva Gonzalez went and made her denounce to the Attorney General in Bolivia. The fact is that the Attorney General in Bolivia is a guy.
Lanchipa, right?
Okay. Yeah, Lanchipa. And not only he is from the MAS, but I think he has some type of family relationship with Arce. I think he has
the finance minister,
the daughter of Lanchipa. No, the guy, the Arce Catacora, the minister of the Minister of Justice in Bolivia, the former Minister of Justice in Bolivia. I think Arce Catacora's wife is the daughter of Lanchipa, if I'm not wrong, but there's some relationship there, family relationship. So this guy, this Lanchipa guy, is from the MAS, and he has family relationships with the most powerful guys from the MAS. So of course he was not going to do anything with this denunciation that Mrs. Eva Morales, Senator Eva did. The woman went, and he never proceeded with anything. He just left the paper sleep in his desk. So as a result of this, you can go to a criminal court, to an international criminal court, and say, we did this, we went to the criminal court in Bolivia. The criminal courts did not work in Bolivia because you explained the reasons. So that's the reason we want to have the doors open in The Hague. So they did that. And this lawyer is doing it. I think he's stationed in France, but he's handling the process in The Hague. And that's the argument, in order to have the process be of the competency of the Hague Court.
Those are the charges for terrorism.
Those are the charges against him. Yeah, those are the charges against him. Yes, against the president. So yes, you can open charges against him, and probably against many of the ministers that were part of these decisions of the happenings since October the 20th. But don't forget that you can also open charges against these people from crimes from before, like the Hotel de Americas. That's something that has to be tried in Bolivia. There's no question about that. If you have seen. There are voices that are saying that there's a decree, a supreme decree that was approved by Carlos Mesa, whereby he declared the amnesty of the social movements in the happenings of 2003.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the reason why nobody from the movements were part of the process, of the criminal process against Goni. The Goni trial is against Goni and his cabinet of the time of the 2003 debacle, what happened then, of the killings and all that. But Goni said, okay, I can be tried, but you also have to try these guys, because they were the ones who committed many crimes, who Evo Morales and the social movement people. And then Carlos Mesa approved a supreme decree, indicated that there was going to be indemnity vis-a-vis the social movements. That's why Evo Morales and all the leaders of that time are not part of the process in Bolivia, or the criminal process. That's what they want to do now.
They just want to mirror that, but okay.
Yeah.
But they also want to include.
Yeah.
Like I said, the wording, at least the way I took it, they're including pretty much anybody and everybody that they see fit. I mean, there's nobody that you could try for anything. Let me. It says, I believe it says, based on the events that unfolded from the 21st of October on, right? Based on, but it doesn't say limited to. And so let's say, just maybe this is a poor example, but at least it seems like the wording is so loose and so generalized that I could have gone and robbed a bank, let's say, a year ago, and I could use the argument that, because I'm one of the people considered in that whole list of, indigenous leaders and general citizens and this and that, there's nobody who that couldn't apply to. And basically they're granted immunity for anything based on what happened from October 21st on, but not limited to. I mean, the MAS is really good at taking a very, very loose interpretation of laws and using them to their advantage. I don't know if I make myself understood with that, but
yeah,
it just seems like it seems like it's so broad and generalized that they could use it any way they want, and not only applicable, sorry, to what happened from October 21st on. So
my perception is the following: one, you don't need a law of that nature, because all those guarantees and all those rights are precepts
in the Constitution,
included in the Constitution. Yeah, you don't need any law to say that these people have all these rights, because it's written there. The question is, why do they write them? And I think you do good, because you are looking at very specific the way things are stated there. And when you look at the specifics, they are clearly not only favoring them, but extending the rights and the guarantees that the Constitution provides them. They're making them better even. That's the best way that I have to describe them. If I have a constitutional right and I write a law that regulates that constitutional right, I can make that right even bigger in the new law. And I think that's what they're doing here.
Like I said, it seems like they're suddenly very interested in assuring and guaranteeing that due process is actually respected and followed, which is something that was never a concern for them when they were in power.
Yes, but what they're not doing is two things. First, there are people within those movements that have burnt the house of Mr. What's the name of the president of the University of San Andres?
Racine.
Albarracin, right. These guys were the ones that burnt that. These guys are burned the journalist's house from La Paz. These guys are these guys are the people that burnt the buses in La Paz. I don't know how many buses, but buses. These are the people that did that. And these were planned affairs. These were planned things. It's not that all of a sudden they decided, hey, let's burn those buses. No, they had a plan. They developed the plan and they executed the plan. So, these are the people, and that law says nothing about that. It just protects them. It protects them as if what they were doing, they were defending the rights of the poor people in Bolivia. And defending the indigenous people of Bolivia, but actually, many of those killings and many of those crimes were committed by them. And it doesn't say the law doesn't say that these guys have to go and bear the weight of the law according to what the law says. That's not mentioned. It should be mentioned just for the law to be some way equitable, because otherwise it's just all in favor of criminals. Basically, they're criminals, and they're looking for a law to protect their crimes. Basically, that's what's happening, which is even worse. You are aware that in Bolivia there's a law of discrimination, against discrimination. This is a discriminatory, and they can be tried for discrimination because they have written a law in order to protect criminals and in order to protect only their people, which are the social movement.
Some party affiliation. Basically.
It has a name and a last name. It's not. You're right when it says it includes everybody, because it says comma everybody else. But if you go to a court being everybody else, I want to see you in front of a judge and count as part of everybody else. You say, hey, but it says here everybody else, and I'm part of everybody else. No. The people that count in that writing are the people from the unions and the people from the social movements, and that's clearly stated there. It's a discriminatory
and they're
law,
also put first. They're put first.
They're put first, of course, and they're almost with names and last names. It doesn't say.
I think initially, the initial draft actually stated Evo Morales and Alvaro Garcia Linero, and I don't know who else. And they changed it.
Yeah, they changed because there was too much. Now they erase the names, but it's basically the same thing. and they're not saying anything about the crimes, because these people committed crimes and they have to be judged by the law, with the due process of law and all the defenses they can find in the laws of Bolivia. But they have to go to jail. They killed people. They burned homes. They burned more than 60 buses. They were today there are people in the hospital still as a result of the wounds, and no, they cannot be protected by any law other than the Constitution. This is an illegal law. And I don't know what the government is going to do about this, because it's hard to stop.
That's probably a good place to try to conclude. And we're slightly over time, but in conclusion, what can be done to stop this law and going through? My understanding is that, okay, so the MAS has majority in both chambers, right? In the chamber, the Senate, and in the Chamber of Deputies, or however you want to translate that. Right. So they can pass it. Now, Agnes has veto power, correct? But they can go back, I think, with another, maybe you know about that. They can override the veto, which they have they have enough votes to do that.
Oh, yeah.
In which case, Agnes said she would take it to the Constitutional Tribunal, right? Basically, the Supreme Court. To argue that it's an unconstitutional law, in which case they would have the final say. Am I not correct?
Yes, you're correct. That's exactly what will happen, apparently.
How likely do you think that is to happen, based on, the tribunal in the past has clearly favored Evo Morales with cheap arguments, but recently, I think they're the ones who also approved something under Agnes, that
the succession.
Right, the succession. Thank you. The succession, which I don't know if it was a surprise or not, but they certainly they certainly acted contrary to interests that were anybody's interests that weren't masistas in the past. And so, what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, I think there's a saying in when you study law, the professors of criminal law, my professor at least, pointed out something that the first day of school, he said, criminal law is the most political of all the branches of the law. And that's true, and that is absolutely true. Not only in Bolivia, anywhere in the world, it's so political, it is so political, in Bolivia. Look, in the US, if you have a very racial thing, people don't do things. O.J. Simpson was freed because the jury was mostly black, and then they had the civil suit and they won because it was not the same thing, and like that case of O.J. Simpson, I can mention many, many cases in the States, because criminal suits are very highly political. And what you have here is a tribunal, a constitutional tribunal, that is going to decide whether this law is legal or not, constitutional or not. But basically, we're talking about criminal law, because we're talking about freedom of people here, about criminal issues. So these people are going to decide this on the environment of the political climate that will be prevalent at that point. And I don't know when this will happen, but if it happens in the next 2 or 3 months,
my impression is they want it to happen sooner than later, the masistas, because they want Evo back here during their campaign.
Yeah,
that's my suspicion. Yeah, he can be a much more effective campaign manager, which is what they've named him as, or in charge of the MAS campaign, being physically present in Bolivia rather than in Argentina, right? So, I'm assuming that's why they're pushing this so quickly.
Yeah, but they'll play politics too. They'll see what's the right time. Timing is everything in politics. So if they do it right now, I presume that they're not going. The effect could be worse than if they do it like in a month or 2 months. Why? I think the MAS in general is going to grow as the campaign comes closer. One, they will have chosen their presidential candidate. That's going to mean a lot here. Who the presidential candidate is will determine the type of backing up that the MAS is going to have in Bolivia. And once that is established, also what's going to happen with the MAS in general, with Evo Morales next door, because the ghost is next door. One thing was to have Evo Morales in Mexico. We didn't feel him here. But ever since the moment he landed in Buenos Aires, I perceive that the feeling in Bolivia is that he's too close, and he can anytime.
It's unsettling. It's unsettling for anybody who doesn't like the guy.
Yeah, people feel that if he comes in Bolivia, that's it. The ghost is here, the monster is here, and we have the Hulk again back home. And he can become president. That's the simple-minded analysis of this whole thing. But it's not so simple-minded. It's also true, because in politics, like in economy, everything is in the mind of the people. If people feel that, then the ghost becomes bigger and bigger. My feeling is that the closest the ghost is to home, the less likely that the Constitutional Tribunal will rule against him. Because if they feel that the ghost can become a leader again and get into Bolivia, then they're just going to be very careful, and they're going to approve the law through the Constitutional Tribunal. I mean, yeah. I think that's bad news, but
I don't know if I like hearing that.
No, definitely, yeah, definitely. I don't either. But the MAS is growing again, and the MAS has Evo is close to Bolivia, and he has been having success in Buenos Aires, which I didn't feel that it would happen. People see him as a hero in Buenos Aires, and I think there's an issue we should speak about next time, because it's an issue by itself. You mentioned one time, not on the air, the reasoning why Argentinians behave like they behave in terms of vis-a-vis Evo Morales. And I think that what you mentioned that time was correct. I don't know. This is something that we have to explain. I'm not understanding this yet. But he's very popular in the streets of Buenos Aires. And I don't know what's happening. He was not popular in Mexico City. But that's something that we may speak next time. It was the two issues that we spoke about today are very big issues, but the presence of Evo Morales in Argentina is terrifying in Bolivia. No question.
Well, no question about it.
Yeah, no question about it. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we'll leave that for next time. Yes. Thanks again to our listeners. And yeah, I think this was a great discussion. And in closing, we keep improving. And anybody, again, who wants to comment or say anything, suggestions, please do let us know.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Paul, for being such a competent partner on this. Your point of view as an American in relationship to Bolivian politics is very important, because you look at politics from a different perspective, which I think adds a lot to the political analysis, and especially to our listeners, because many of our listeners are not Bolivians, and it is very important to have an outsider's point of view. And I think that even though you have lived so long in Bolivia, your point of view is still very, very neutral in terms of what happens in this country. So thank you again for everything.
Yeah, and I think something we've never talked about is why we chose to do this in English and rather than Spanish. And anybody who doesn't know me, I feel I could do this in Spanish as just as easily.
Well, maybe even better.
Maybe even better.
You speak Spanish better than I speak, but you're doing an effort now, and that's also appreciated.
But the point is to reach an audience that wouldn't be reached otherwise, and to bring some more awareness on these issues. So we'll leave it there. Mm-hmm. And the feeling's mutual, by the way. I really enjoyed doing this with you. So until next time.
Okay, we'll see you.